Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through a drifting curtain of cold northern air and step into the soft, flickering glow of a Viking Longhouse, right as the evening settles over the farm like a heavy wool cloak. You feel that first breath of warm, smoky heat rush against your cheeks, and for a moment you just stand there, blinking as your eyes adjust to the dimness inside. Shapes shift, shadows stretch. A low orange ember light glows along the centre hearth, and you start to realise you probably won't survive this lifestyle for more than about 12 minutes. But that's fine. We're here to explore, not, thrive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing the sleepy map fill up across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push forward into the longhouse, still blinking, still trying to make sense of the layout. The smell hits you first, a heavy mix of wood smoke, animals, and stew thickening in a pot somewhere. It's not unpleasant, but it is the kind of scent that sinks into your hair and never quite leaves. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, slightly uneven, cool along the edges and warm where the fire radiates heat. The people inside glance your way, but only briefly. Vikings weren't big on dramatic greetings inside their homes. They clock your presence the same way someone would notice a cat wandering into a kitchen. Vaguely curious, mildly approving, but mostly focused on their own tasks. One woman is weaving near the long wall. A man is sharpening a small axe. Children flit around like sparks from the fire. Everyone just keeps moving. You notice immediately that the longhouse feels alive, not in a mystical, whispering spirits kind of way, though some Vikings absolutely believed their houses had protective beings, more in the sense that everything is happening at once. The fire crackles, a pot bubbles, someone coughs, a child giggles, a cow shifts its weight somewhere in the far dim. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Longhouses in the Viking Age were often between 60 and 100 feet long, depending on wealth, with the wealthier farms boasting larger halls capable of hosting guests, feasts, and more than one family. You're standing in something like that, long, narrow, and a little overwhelming. The roof slopes low and beams arch above like the ribs of an upside-down ship. That's not accidental. Many Viking builders were boat builders, so they built what they knew. Some historians even argue whether longhouses should be understood as giant, land-anchored ships meant to symbolically carry families through the storms of life. Others shrug and say, no, they just used the tools they had. Both sides feel very invested in whether or not metaphor matters in architecture. You try moving toward the hearth, partly because humans are instinctively attracted to warmth, and partly because the further edges of the house are swallowed in shadow. The fire burns in a long trench of stones, sending up trails of smoke that drift lazily to the smoke hole in the roof. Except, and this is important, the smoke does not all go out the hole. That would be far too luxurious. Instead, it hangs around, spreading into a permanent indoor fog that makes your eyes water just a bit. In fact, one quirky little tidbit. The smoke layer in Viking homes acted as a kind of insect deterrent, killing off fleas and lice. So congratulations, your lungs are suffering but your scalp is thriving. You shuffle closer, the warmth soaking through your clothes, and suddenly the longhouse feels less alien. You can see more clearly now. Benches lining the walls, sleeping platforms draped with furs, storage chests beneath them, and at the far end a raised seat of honour where the household leader sits. You're absolutely not supposed to sit there, but you definitely consider it for half a second. That's one light joke. You have two more coming. One of the younger men eyes you with a smirk, like he's waiting to see if you'll do something ridiculous, like step onto the honour platform or try to pet the goats. You don't. You're behaving, for now. You shift again, trying to take in the full sensory picture. The sound of the fire feels almost hypnotic. The air is thick and warm and just a little too close. Outside, the cold wind is pushing at the walls, but inside you're wrapped in something ancient, a rhythm of domestic life that has barely changed for centuries. You're becoming aware that there's no privacy. None. Zero. If you sneeze, 17 people will bless you and then ask why you sneezed. You're not alone even when you're sitting by yourself. And that's the thing. Viking longhouses weren't just homes, they were entire little worlds. Workspace, sleeping space, social hall, kitchen, barn, and emotional battleground, all in one long, smoky envelope of timber. As you stand there taking it in, someone hands you a wooden cup. You don't know what's inside it, but you drink anyway, because refusing would be rude. It turns out to be warm, slightly sour whey. You smile politely. Inside your soul, you scream politely. Someone laughs, softly, kindly, and gestures for you to sit near the hearth. It's a sign of welcome, and you accept it. You lower yourself onto a fur-covered bench, the wood creaking beneath you. The heat of the fire licks at your shins, and the flickering light dances across your vision in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. For the first time, you settle in and think, this is where you live now, inside a giant wooden lung of fire and family. Your journey in the longhouse has begun. You haven't been sitting by that hearth for more than a few minutes before someone gestures for you to stand again and find your place. And this is where your Viking Longhouse education truly begins, because nothing inside this hall is more political, more emotionally charged, or more quietly competitive than the question of where you sleep. You probably thought you'd just claim a cozy corner and call it a night. Yeah. No. In a Viking longhouse, your sleeping spot is basically your identity badge. It tells everyone who you are, how important you are, who you belong to, and whether you're likely to survive the next social blunder you make. It's like Viking high school seating, except the stakes are life, death, and accidentally spooning a goat. The hall is long, narrow, and lined with raised wooden platforms along both walls. These aren't beds the way you imagine them. They're more like communal benches that double as seating during the day and sleeping areas at night. Thick furs, blankets, and old woven mats are layered on top, soft in some spots, suspiciously lumpy in others. You immediately spot one that looks unbelievably comfortable. But trust me, someone important sleeps there, so don't even think about it. A mainstream historical fact floats through your mind as you scan the options. Vikings typically slept in pairs or small family clusters, often fully clothed, especially in colder months. Privacy wasn't just scarce, it was non-existent. If someone rolled over, laughed in their sleep, muttered, or passed judgment on your snoring, you were going to hear it. A woman approaches, calm, confident, clearly the one running the household's nighttime logistics. She gives you a quick once-over, assessing exactly what kind of trouble you'll be if they put you too close to the children or too close to the elders. After a moment, she points you toward a mid-hall space, middle-tier importance, not bad, not great. Solidly, you won't offend anyone here. As you walk that direction, you notice how the longhouse narrows your movement. You turn sideways between benches, duck under a hanging drying rack, and step over a basket of wool. You're learning quickly that if you want to be liked in a Viking hall, you must never, under any circumstances, kick, knock over, or step on anything textile-related. That's a light joke number 2. The weavers take their craft personally. You reach your assigned spot. It's a simple stretch of platform covered with furs that smell like a mixture of warm sheep, sweat, and the kind of comfort you convince yourself is rustic. You sit. The fur shifts beneath you, soft at first, then a little prickly. You adjust. It prickles again. You adjust a third time. Congratulations. You've just discovered the Viking version of a memory foam mattress. It remembers nothing, and you just cope. As you get your bearings, you notice how people subtly guard their spaces. A chest at the foot of a sleeping bench marks someone's territory. A particular fur draped a certain way signals occupied. Sometimes the presence of a child's toy tells you this is a family area. The longhouse has no doors, but plenty of invisible ones. A quirky historical tidbit drifts in. Some Viking households placed charms or carved amulets near sleeping areas to ward off nightmares or hostile spirits. People believed the boundary between waking and sleeping made you vulnerable. So if you see a little carved figure staring at you from the shadows, that's normal, probably. You try not to look directly into its wooden eyes. Someone lies down near you, stretching out like a satisfied cat. Another person crawls into their space across the hall. A few children slip into the furs beside a parent. Everyone moves with practiced efficiency. You, meanwhile, are trying to decide whether your boots should stay on or off. The answer is off but close, very close, because if you need to get up in the middle of the night, you do not want to be barefoot on cold earth, spilled broth or random hay. You shift again. The fur tickles your neck. You cough lightly as the fire smoke drifts, and you feel, strangely, a sense of belonging settle in. Vikings didn't separate sleeping from living. Everything happened together. The sleeping bench beside you holds the day's warmth, the family's memories, the household's chatter. Yet even in this cozy chaos, the scholar in your brain pokes you with another reality. Historians still argue whether Vikings slept reclining fully or half sitting against the wall, especially in crowded halls. Some evidence suggests they didn't like lying flat because it mimicked death. Others say that theory is as flimsy as a week-old fishnet. No one agrees, but tonight, your back votes for reclining. People murmur as they settle. Someone yawns. A baby squeaks. A dog circles 3 times and collapses dramatically, claiming the warmest spot by the hearth. Honestly, the dog seems to outrank you socially. As you lean back, you realize something you didn't expect. The Longhouse doesn't feel chaotic anymore. It feels like a giant living blanket. Warm bodies, low voices, thick furs, a hearth that never truly sleeps. Your sleeping spot is humble, a bit itchy, and definitely not ergonomic. But it's yours. And in the Longhouse, that means something. You're barely settled into your new sleeping spot when the Longhouse reminds you of its most demanding resident, the central hearth. It rules the entire place like a smoky, glowing monarch, and you quickly realize that everything you do in this hall revolves around keeping that fire alive. Not roaring, not blazing, just alive. Like a needy pet that also happens to be your only source of warmth, light, cooked food, and emotional stability. You stand and move closer again, partly because your toes are cold and partly because the hearth is magnetically hypnotic. A long, shallow, stone-lined trench stretches through the centre of the hall, glowing with red embers and small flames licking upward, their shadows dancing across the rafters like restless spirits. A wave of heat washes over you. Not a gentle one, but a thick, slightly suffocating kind of warmth, the kind that makes your eyes sting and your skin prickle. This is where your Viking reality check kicks in. You're going to smell like smoke for the rest of your life. Even in the afterlife, people might greet you with, "Hey, did you live in a barbecue pit?" And you'll just nod. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. Viking longhouses used the open central hearth because chimneys hadn't entered Scandinavian domestic architecture yet. Smoke simply drifted upward to an opening in the roof. Sometimes. On a good day. On a peaceful, wind-free day. But right now, that smoke is taking detours like a tourist without a map. It curls, swirls, loops sideways, and occasionally rolls directly into your face like it's trying to have a personal conversation with your eyeballs. You cough politely because everyone else seems immune to it. They've inhaled so much smoke over the years that their respiratory systems are probably coated in a protective layer of soot. Truly bulletproof lungs, or maybe just permanently annoyed ones. You watch as a man adds a chunk of wood to the embers. Not too much, not too little. It's a science. Too much wood and the smoke becomes unbearable. Too little and the warmth vanishes. Fire management in a Viking longhouse is the medieval equivalent of thermostat warfare. People glare. People disagree. People mutter dramatic opinions about whether the fire is too hot or too weak or exactly right, but in a clearly passive-aggressive tone. A quirky tidbit bubbles up in your mind. The smoke that lingered in longhouses actually helped preserve the wooden beams. It acted like a natural protective coating, darkening the wood but making it more resistant to insects and rot. So yes, you're slowly marinating your lungs, but hey, the house looks great. You step a little closer, holding out your hands. The heat feels good, harsh but comforting, like sticking your hands in front of an oven door. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the shifting warmth on your cheeks. When you open them again, you notice how the entire hall organizes itself around this hearth. People cook here, children play here, adults gossip here, crafts are done nearby for the best light. Even arguments happen here, because nothing says intense domestic drama, like 2 people yelling while poking at a stew pot. But the hearth does something unexpected too. It creates pockets of darkness. The further you step away from it, the deeper the shadows become, until the back edges of the longhouse feel like they belong to a different world. Quiet, cold, almost whispering. You get the sense that people don't linger there unless they have a reason. Historians still argue whether those darker areas were used for storage, sleeping, or ritual space. Some say they were multifunctional, others argue for strict divisions, and a few publish papers that basically amount to, "We don't know, but here's a beautifully illustrated guess." Typical academic energy. Closer to the fire, someone stirs a pot that smells like barley, onions, and something vaguely meaty. Possibly beef, possibly fish, possibly don't ask. The steam drifts upward, fighting the smoke for vertical dominance. A child toddles past holding a stick and you realise something deeply troubling. That stick is on fire. The toddler is delighted. You are horrified. No one else reacts. Apparently this is normal, and the child probably has better fire management skills than you do. Another light joke emerges naturally. You start calculating how many minutes it will take before you trip and fall directly into the hearth. You settle on immediately, which feels fair. You take a slow step back, absorbing the scene, the warmth, the dryness, the ache behind your eyes from the smoke, the sound of crackling embers popping like tiny fireworks, the flicker of shadows across fur-lined benches, the thick, heavy atmosphere inside this long wooden lung. It becomes clear that the hearth isn't just a heat source, it's the heartbeat of the house. Without it, everything would collapse into cold, silence, and darkness. With it, life continues, messy, loud, smoky, warm. You breathe in again, feeling the heat wash over you, and you realise you're beginning to understand this place on a deeper level. Not just as a visitor, but as someone settling into its rhythms. The hearth defines your days, your nights, your comfort, and sometimes your suffering. But right now, it simply anchors you, and the Longhouse, smoky and alive, breathes with you. You're barely settled into your new sleeping spot when the Longhouse reminds you of its most demanding resident, the central hearth. It rules the entire place like a smoky, glowing monarch, and you quickly realise that everything you do in this hall revolves around keeping that fire alive. Not roaring, not blazing, just alive, like a needy pet that also happens to be your only source of warmth, light, cooked food, and emotional stability. You stand and move closer again, partly because your toes are cold and partly because the hearth is magnetically hypnotic. A long, shallow, stone-lined trench stretches through the centre of the hall, glowing with red embers and small flames licking upward, their shadows dancing across the rafters like restless spirits. A wave of heat washes over you. Not a gentle one, but a thick, slightly suffocating kind of warmth. The kind that makes your eyes sting and your skin prickle. This is where your Viking reality check kicks in. You're going to smell like smoke for the rest of your life. Even in the afterlife, people might greet you with, "Hey, did you live in a barbecue pit?" And you'll just nod. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. Viking longhouses used the open central hearth because chimneys hadn't entered Scandinavian domestic architecture yet. Smoke simply drifted upward to an opening in the roof. Sometimes. On a good day. On a peaceful, wind-free day. But right now, that smoke is taking detours like a tourist without a map. It curls, swirls, loops sideways, and occasionally rolls directly into your face like it's trying to have a personal conversation with your eyeballs. You cough politely because everyone else seems immune to it. They've inhaled so much smoke over the years that their respiratory systems are probably coated in a protective layer of soot. Truly bulletproof lungs, or maybe just permanently annoyed ones. You watch as a man adds a chunk of wood to the embers. Not too much, not too little. It's a science. Too much wood, and the smoke becomes unbearable. Too little, and the warmth vanishes. Fire management in a Viking longhouse is the medieval equivalent of thermostat warfare. People glare. People disagree. People mutter dramatic opinions about whether the fire is too hot or too weak or exactly right, but in a clearly passive-aggressive tone. A quirky tidbit bubbles up in your mind. The smoke that lingered in longhouses actually helped preserve the wooden beams. It acted like a natural protective coating, darkening the wood but making it more resistant to insects and rot. So yes, you're slowly marinating your lungs, but hey, the house looks great. You step a little closer, holding out your hands. The heat feels good, harsh but comforting, like sticking your hands in front of an oven door. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the shifting warmth on your cheeks. When you open them again, you notice how the entire hall organizes itself around this hearth. People cook here, children play here, adults gossip here. Crafts are done nearby for the best light. Even arguments happen here, because nothing says intense domestic drama like two people yelling while poking at a stew pot. But the hearth does something unexpected too. It creates pockets of darkness. The further you step away from it, the deeper the shadows become, until the back edges of the longhouse feel like they belong to a different world. Quiet, cold, almost whispering. You get the sense that people don't linger there unless they have a reason. Historians still argue whether those darker areas were used for storage, sleeping, or ritual space. Some say they were multifunctional, others argue for strict divisions, and a few publish papers that basically amount to, we don't know, but here's a beautifully illustrated guess. Typical academic energy. Closer to the fire, someone stirs a pot that smells like barley, onions, and something vaguely meaty. Possibly beef, possibly fish, possibly don't ask. The steam drifts upward, fighting the smoke for vertical dominance. A child toddles past holding a stick, and you realize something deeply troubling. That stick is on fire. The toddler is delighted. You are horrified. No one else reacts. Apparently this is normal, and the child probably has better fire management skills than you do. Another light joke emerges naturally. You start calculating how many minutes it will take before you trip and fall directly into the hearth. You settle on immediately, which feels fair. You take a slow step back, absorbing the scene, the warmth, the dryness, the ache behind your eyes from the smoke, the sound of crackling embers popping like tiny fireworks, the flicker of shadows across fur-lined benches, the thick, heavy atmosphere inside this long wooden lung. It becomes clear that the hearth isn't just a heat source, it's the heartbeat of the house. Without it, everything would collapse into cold, silence and darkness. With it, life continues, messy, loud, smoky, warm. You breathe in again, feeling the heat wash over you, and you realize you're beginning to understand this place on a deeper level. Not just as a visitor, but as someone settling into its rhythms. The hearth defines your days, your nights, your comfort, and sometimes your suffering, but right now it simply anchors you. And the longhouse, smoky and alive, breathes with you. You're starting to settle into the constant hum of the longhouse when you notice something you somehow overlooked in all the smoke, warmth, and human activity. You're not the only mammal living here, not even close. In fact, as your eyes adjust, you slowly realize that the shadows you assumed were piles of gear are actually cows and goats and sheep, and at least one pig staring at you with deep personal judgment. Welcome to the Viking Longhouse, where livestock are not just farm animals, they're your winter roommates. At first you freeze, unsure whether you've accidentally wandered into the world's coziest barn. But no, this is perfectly normal. The animals shift, snort, blink, and then go right back to whatever animals do at night, which seems to be chew thoughtfully and make a surprising number of bodily noises. A mainstream historical fact nudges in. During harsh northern winters, Vikings brought their livestock inside the longhouse for warmth and protection. The body heat from large animals helped raise indoor temperatures, while the people's presence deterred predators and thieves. It was a win-win situation, unless you were someone who valued fresh air, personal space, or the ability to walk in a straight line without stepping in something mysterious. You take a careful step to your left. A goat's head rises immediately, its eyes narrowing like it's deciding whether you're a friend, a threat, or a potential snack. Goats have that energy. Unpredictable, mischievous, Olympic-level chaos agents. To your right, you hear the slow, patient breathing of a cow, deep and rhythmic, like distant thunder. The cow shifts its weight, and the entire wooden floor seems to take notice. You realize, with absolute clarity, that this cow is more respected in the household than you are. If she wanted your sleeping spot, you'd just move, politely. A quirky tidbit pops into your thoughts. In some Norse regions, it was considered good luck if a cow chose to lie near your sleeping area in winter. People believed cows had protective qualities, almost like warm, heavy guardian spirits. So if the cow wanders toward you later, congratulations, you've been adopted. Of course, all of this means one thing. The sounds never stop. Just when you think the longhouse has reached a sleepy lull, a sheep lets out a confused bleat. A goat stomps its hoof like it's filing a complaint, or the cow sighs with the weight of someone who has seen too much. You glance around and catch a child lazily scratching a pig behind the ears as if this is the most normal bedtime routine in the world, and honestly, for them, it is. For you, it feels like a very strange dream where you went to bed in a community dorm and woke up in a cross-species slumber party. Your third light joke sneaks in as you wonder whether you should introduce yourself to the animals. "Hi, I'm new here. I don't eat hay, but I do overthink things." As you inch past, you start appreciating the practical brilliance of this arrangement. The animals generate heat. They keep food production within reach. They're safer from wolves, storms, and the occasional someone forgot to close the gate situation. And for the humans living here, having the animals indoors is simply part of life, like having roommates who never pay rent and occasionally kick the wall for fun. Historians still argue whether the animals were cordoned off behind half walls or simply kept at the back of the hall with minimal barriers. Some reconstructions show wooden partitions, others show open shared space. The debate is spirited, borderline dramatic, and occasionally boils down to, "We found some wood, and we're not sure what it did." You lower yourself onto your bench again, watching the animals settle. A goat curls up beside a pile of straw. The cow lowers herself with a long groaning sigh that shakes the floorboards. The pig spins in a slow circle before plopping down with admirable commitment. And then something unexpected happens. The warmth from the animals begins to fill the hall. Not the sharp, smoky heat of the hearth. No, this is different. It's soft, organic, a gentle thermal cushion that wraps the longhouse in a steady living warmth. The longhouse breathes, the people breathe, the animals breathe. And for the first time, you understand why this crowded, smoky, noisy arrangement worked. The longhouse isn't just a home, it's a shared heartbeat, and tonight, you're part of the herd. Morning hasn't even fully stretched across the sky when the longhouse erupts into movement. You're still wrapped in half-sleep, the warmth of bodies and animals clinging to you like a heavy quilt when the rhythm of the day begins. There is no lazy wake-up here, no slow blinking at your phone, no 5 more minutes. In a Viking Longhouse, dawn isn't a suggestion, it's an alarm clock made of chores. You sit up, hair full of smoke, heart full of confusion, and realise quickly that people are already working, not getting ready to work. Working. As if they woke up mid-task. Someone is weaving beside the wall, the rhythmic thwip-thwip of the loom tapping like a metronome. A man crouches near his tool chest, sharpening an axe with slow, practiced motions. A woman ladles out the remains of last night's stew for breakfast. Children chase each other while trying to carry small bundles of kindling, which is clearly going as well as you'd expect. You rub your eyes and stand, trying to look useful, even though you have no idea where to begin. Vikings don't do idle. If you're awake, you're working, or you're about to be voluntold to work. A mainstream historical fact nudges its way into your mind. Daily chores inside Viking longhouses were constant, layered, and often overlapping. Weaving, stitching, repairing tools, preparing meals, grinding grain, carving wood, making rope, tending the fire, feeding animals, all of it happened inside the same narrow space, often at the same time. The longhouse was a multitasking machine before multitasking became a corporate buzzword. Someone hands you a piece of wood and a knife. You have no idea what you're supposed to carve, so you nod confidently and begin making gentle, hopefully intentional-looking shavings. You try to look like you've carved many objects in your life. You absolutely have not. Nearby, a woman spins wool with an expression of serene expertise. Her hands move so fast you're convinced she has some kind of supernatural textile ability. Another woman crushes herbs with a stone, while an older man repairs leather straps with a quiet hum. Everyone knows exactly what they're doing, where they need to be, and how to avoid bumping into one another. Mostly. A goat wanders through the middle of this chore network, offering precisely zero apology. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Viking women produced so much cloth that it was often used as currency. A well-woven bolt of wool could be traded just like silver, which means the weaving happening beside you is essentially a small mint humming along in the corner. You're starting to get the idea that there is no such thing as downtime. Even mealtime preparation happens while people continue weaving, carving, mending, or stirring something that smells questionable. The Longhouse feels like a living workshop, a giant conveyor belt of tasks where each person fills a specific, constantly shifting role. You accidentally drop your piece of wood onto the floor. It lands with a dramatic thud, bouncing off a goat's leg. The goat sighs, deeply offended. A child giggles. Someone hands you a different piece of wood, probably assuming your first attempt was a lost cause. That's your first joke of this section. Your woodworking career died before it lived. Historians still argue whether Longhouse chores were strictly divided by gender, or whether smaller households simply adapted based on available hands. Some sources point to clear roles: women weaving, men carving, women managing the hearth, men repairing tools. But other evidence suggests flexibility, especially during seasonal crunch times when survival mattered more than tradition. Like most Viking life questions, the scholarly debate has enough footnotes to build a small fort. A group of children sits cross-legged on the floor, grinding barley with 2 stones. You can tell immediately which child has been doing this longest. Their arms move with bored efficiency, their expression fully checked out. You recognize the look. It's the same one modern kids have while doing chores they absolutely did not volunteer for. You lean back for a moment, absorbing the overlapping sounds, the tap of a loom, the scrape of a knife on wood, the bubbling of porridge, the shuffle of livestock, the occasional frustrated sigh of someone whose thread snapped for the 3rd time. And over all of it, the Longhouse creaks softly as the cold morning air presses against its walls, reminding everyone that winter isn't done with them yet. You try to help with something else, maybe stirring a pot. You reach for the ladle, and a woman gently but firmly nudges your hand away. Apparently food preparation is not within your skill set. You've been demoted back to person who holds wood and quietly panics. Your second joke slips in naturally. You realise the only chore you're qualified for is standing in the way. You wander toward the door for fresh air, but even that is part of someone's job. Sweeping ash away, checking for snowdrifts, guarding against drafts. You step aside, letting a man bundle reeds for roof repairs. Everything has purpose. Slowly, the rhythm begins to make sense. Everything inside the Longhouse hums with necessity. Everyone contributes. Every task matters. And here in this warm, smoky hall, the day begins not with quiet reflection but with motion. Constant, purposeful motion. You're not just observing life in a Viking Longhouse anymore. You're caught up in it. Word count 1000. By the time the morning chores start blending into late morning chores, which blend seamlessly into early afternoon chores, your stomach finally makes itself heard. Loudly, rudely, loud enough that the goat gives you a side eye. Thankfully, the scent of something warm and familiar drifts from the hearth. The Longhouse's midday meal bubbling quietly in a heavy iron pot that looks older than most of the people sitting nearby. You drift toward the fire, trying not to look too desperate. The pot hangs over the embers, steam rising in gentle coils that curl into the ever-present haze of smoke above. A woman pauses in her stitching, reaches for a ladle carved from a single piece of wood, and gives the pot a slow, methodical stir. And that's when you realise what Viking cuisine really is. Stew. Not sometimes stew. Not stew if the weather's bad. Just stew. All day, every day, forever. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Vikings relied heavily on pottage, a perpetual stew that simmered for days, sometimes weeks, with new ingredients added continuously. Barley, onions, cabbage, dried fish, leftover meat, herbs, maybe the remains of yesterday's dinner, and hopefully nothing that used to bleat. It wasn't just efficient, it was survival in a bowl. You lean over the pot and inhale. It smells good. Surprisingly good. Warm, earthy, comforting. Like someone distilled, "It's been a long week" into food form. If soup had a personality, Viking pottage would be the dependable friend who always shows up, even if they smell faintly of smoked herring. A girl hands you a wooden bowl. It's warm from the fire, slightly uneven, and carved with little marks from someone practicing their knife skills. You murmur a thank you and take your portion, thick and steaming, with barley grains floating lazily at the top. Your first joke comes naturally as you consider the texture. You're not sure whether you're supposed to chew it or negotiate with it. You join the others sitting along the benches. Eating in a Viking longhouse is communal, noisy, casual, and accompanied by constant movement around the hearth. People lean over bowls, sip, slurp, talk, laugh, and reach for bread. There's no concept of elbows off the table here. Table manners are essentially, don't stab someone's hand and don't hog the stew. You taste the broth. It's hearty and surprisingly flavourful, a little salty, a little smoky, and filled with the kind of warmth that settles deep in your chest. The barley adds weight. The vegetables add sweetness. The meat, whatever it was in a previous life, adds richness. You're halfway through your bowl before you realise you've inhaled the entire thing. Nearby, someone tears off a piece of flatbread and dips it into their own bowl. You follow their lead. The bread is dense and slightly burnt, but it works. Everything here works. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some Viking households flavoured there, stews with birch sap or wild apples when they were in season. Others added dried seaweed for extra minerals. You glance at your bowl and wonder if the faintly greenish thing floating in the corner is seaweed, or just a vegetable that's given up. Another pot simmers beside the main stew, this one much smaller. Someone lifts the lid, and a strong smell hits you like a wave. Fermented fish. Lutefisk before it had a PR team. You take a respectful step back. This dish is absolutely not beginner-friendly. A man slurps it down with delight. You admire him, from afar, very afar. As you finish eating, you notice the way the meal naturally blends back into the rhythm of Longhouse life. No formal ending, no meal is over proclamation. People simply return their bowls, rinse them with a splash of water, and resume their chores. The Longhouse doesn't pause for food, it merely shifts around it. Historians still argue whether Vikings ate 3 structured meals a day or simply grazed as needed around the hearth. Some evidence points to a morning and evening meal. Others suggest constant small servings from the ever-simmering pots. Given what you've seen, constant small servings seems pretty accurate. The Longhouse is, among other things, a 24-hour kitchen with no off switch. A child sits beside you, chewing bread with impressive concentration, crumbs scattering like confetti. You smile and the child lifts the remaining half of their bread toward you, then immediately takes a huge bite out of it. Offer rescinded. You hear the scrape of the ladle again as someone stirs the pot, adding more barley, tossing in more herbs, checking the heat. It never stops. The stew pot is as central to the Longhouse as the hearth itself. A reliable companion, a daily ritual, a warm anchor in a cold world. Your second joke arrives quietly. You realise that if you lived here long enough, you'd eventually become 40% potted yourself. You hand back your bowl, feeling warmer, heavier, calmer. Your stomach sighs in contentment. The smoke settles around you. The Longhouse buzzes with people returning to their tasks. You glance once more at the pot, gently bubbling, never resting. Meals here aren't events, they're rhythms, they're comfort, they're continuity. And as you settle into the Longhouse's heartbeat, your place in this smoky, bustling world feels just a little more real. The warmth from the stew still lingers in your chest as you return to your spot on the bench. But almost immediately, you become aware of something prickling at your neck. Not a threat, not a draft, just discomfort. A familiar, scratchy, unmistakably Viking discomfort. Your clothes. Because now that the Longhouse has settled into its midday hum, you're suddenly hyper-aware that everything you're wearing feels like it was woven out of a gentle cloud that hates you. You tug at your sleeve. It fights back. Welcome to Viking clothing. Layers of wool so sturdy they could probably stop a low-speed arrow, yet somehow still itchy enough to make you question all your life choices. You stand, stretching your arms slowly, feeling the weight of the garments pull at you. Every piece is substantial, heavy, practical. Built for a world where the wind doesn't just blow, it interrogates your soul. A mainstream historical fact filters in. Vikings relied heavily on wool for clothing because sheep thrived in Scandinavia's climate, and wool retained warmth even when damp, a useful trait when you live in a cold, wet, unpredictable environment surrounded by the emotional mood swings of northern weather. Linen existed too, but it was saved for warmer seasons or wealthier households. Right now you're wearing wool, several layers of it. You're essentially one large walking sweater. You glance at the others around the Longhouse to see how they manage it. A man ties his cloak across his chest with practiced grace. A woman adjusts the brooches holding her straps in place. Children tug at tunics that look like they were handed down through at least 5 older siblings and possibly one goat. The clothing blends seamlessly into the rhythm of daily life. But you're starting to itch in places you didn't know could itch. A woman notices your discomfort and offers you a sympathetic smile. She gestures for you to sit beside her, then begins explaining, through gestures and slow, patient pantomime, how the layers work. Tunic, under tunic, cloak, belt, woolen socks, leather shoes, sometimes leg wrappings, and if you're very unlucky, a scratchy hood that traps enough heat to cook a small vegetable. You touch your cloak again. It feels like wearing a warm hug given by someone with sandpaper hands. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Viking clothing was waterproofed using lanolin, the natural oil found in sheep's wool. This kept the garments resistant to rain, but also made them smell faintly like, well, sheep. Vikings probably didn't notice. You definitely do. As you adjust your layers, a child toddles past wearing a tiny tunic that reaches their ankles. They look like an adorable medieval potato. You smile. The child frowns, deeply offended, and scurries away. That's your first joke of the section. You've managed to upset a toddler without saying a single word. You continue adjusting, trying to find the magical non-itch alignment. It doesn't exist. The wool scratches your wrists. It scratches your neck. It scratches your shoulders. Even your ankles feel betrayed. You glance around again, noticing how the clothing creates texture within the longhouse. Woven patterns, embroidered hems, braided belts, fur-lined hoods, and brooches shaped like animals, ships, or geometric symbols. Everything is functional, yes, but also full of identity. Colour indicates status. Patterns reference family. Brooches and pins signal region, wealth, or personal taste. Historians still argue whether Viking clothing was more colourful than popular depictions suggest. Some evidence points to bright blues, reds, and yellows thanks to plant-based dyes. Others argue that vibrant dyes were expensive luxuries. Reconstructionists love this debate. They will absolutely fight each other with replica brooches over it. You pull your cloak tighter as a draft slips through the longhouse door, reminding everyone that warmth is temporary and wind is forever. The cloak is heavy, comforting, and slightly smelly, but it does its job. You instantly feel 10 degrees warmer. You settle back onto your bench. The wool under you prickles. The wool on you prickles. Everything prickles. At this point, you're convinced the Vikings didn't notice the itching simply because they were too busy surviving everything else. Your second joke comes out gently. You realise you're currently wearing enough wool to knit a second version of yourself. A woman nearby pulls out a bundle of yarn and begins spinning it into thread, her fingers moving with astonishing speed. You watch in awe as she turns raw wool, fluffy, tangled, chaotic, into smooth, even strands. It looks almost hypnotic. She hands you a bit of raw wool. It's soft at first, and then hits you with the familiar prickle of Viking reality. You laugh quietly, and she laughs with you, shaking her head knowingly. Cloth making here isn't just a chore, it's a craft, a currency, and a cornerstone of daily life. As she spins, she hums softly. The fire crackles. Someone sharpens a blade. Children play at the far end of the hall. Livestock shift and snort. And you, wrapped in layers of history, slowly adjust to the strange comfort of Viking clothing. It may itch. It may weigh nearly as much as a small dog. It may trap enough heat to start a slow roast. But it also holds you together in this smoky, bustling, endlessly alive longhouse. And whether you like it or not, you're starting to feel like you belong in these woolen layers, prickles and all. You're finally starting to accept the wool situation when another, far more pressing reality of Viking longhouse life becomes impossible to ignore. This place is dark. Not moody, romantic, candlelit restaurant dark. Not cozy winter afternoon dark. No, this is prehistoric cave dark. The kind of dark where shadows have shadows and your eyes spend the entire day arguing with physics. It hits you when you turn your head toward the far end of the hall and nothing. Just a thick velvet blur. Shapes, maybe. People, possibly. A goat, always possible. But truly seeing anything? Not happening. You squint. You blink. You squint harder. It changes nothing. Because in a Viking longhouse, light is a rare and precious visitor. A mainstream historical fact arrives right on cue. Lighting in Viking homes relied almost entirely on hearth glow, tallow lamps, and the occasional sliver of daylight slipping through the open doorway or a small smoke hole. Windows weren't really a thing. If they existed at all, they were tiny, covered with animal bladder, or simply too expensive to bother with. You glance at the hearth, your primary light source, and realise its glow reaches only so far. Beyond 10 or 15 feet, everything dissolves into a murky haze. A woman lifts a small oil lamp, the flame wobbling inside its shallow bowl. She moves with absolute confidence, navigating children, tools, goats, and your unhelpful presence without spilling a drop. You try taking one step after her and immediately almost trip over a stool. That's your first joke of this section. You've been bested by a piece of furniture that hasn't moved in 3 years. The lamp itself fascinates you. It's carved from soapstone or fired clay, filled with animal fat, a single wick gently flickering. The light is warm and soft, lovely, really, but so dim you could hide an entire friendship bracelet workshop 3 feet away and no one would know. A quirky tidbit glimmers in your mind. Some Viking households used fish oil lamps, especially along the coasts. They burned brighter but smelled like someone deep-fried despair. You sniffed the air cautiously. Nope. No fried despair today. Lucky you. As your vision slowly adjusts, you begin noticing how Vikings adapted to darkness. Objects are stored where people expect them, not where it's convenient. Tools hang at predictable heights. Pots sit in familiar positions. People move by memory more than sight. A boy runs past you, full speed, in near total darkness. You stare at him, amazed. You can barely navigate 5 feet without stubbing a toe, and this child is sprinting a marathon around the hearth like he has built-in night vision. Your second joke slips out internally. If Vikings played hide-and-seek, everyone would win by default. Permanently, someone near you lights another lamp. The wick flares, sputters, then steadies into a golden glow that illuminates the face of an older man carving a spoon. His eyes are sharp despite the dimness. His hands trace the curves of the wood with the precision of someone who has lived his entire life in this twilight world. You sit beside him, watching. The lamplight turns the air honey-coloured for a moment, softening the shadows and revealing just how much detail you've been missing. The lines on his face, the pattern on his tunic, the grain of the wooden spoon. And then, just as quickly, someone moves the lamp away and the clarity dissolves again into smoky gloom. Historians still argue whether longhouses were brighter during the day than modern reconstruction suggest. Some claim daylight filtered in through gaps in the roof. Others argue that the smoke hole wasn't enough to brighten the space meaningfully. The debate is endless, fueled by the fact that none of the original longhouses come with intact roofs or user manuals. You step back from the hearth and feel the darkness swallow more of the room. The fire becomes a distant island of light, flickering like a signal fire in a world built of shadow. A young woman passes carrying a bundle of rushes. She kneels near the hearth, twists one into a thin taper, and dips it into a pot of animal fat. She lights it, and suddenly you understand. These are the Viking version of candles. Simple rush lights, bright but quick burning, perfect for tasks but not for lighting a whole home. She hands you one, and you hold it carefully, marvelling at how such a small flame manages to push back the shadows around your hands. It's fragile, flickering, delicate, kind of like your optimism about navigating this house without bumping into livestock. Your third joke settles gently. At this point, the goats have better nighttime visibility than you do, which explains why they keep staring like they're judging your survival odds. But then something shifts. The darkness stops feeling suffocating. It becomes calming. The dimness softens the longhouse. Voices sound warmer. The glow from the hearth pulls people closer. The flicker of the lamps adds a slow, rhythmic pulse to the air. The shadows blur the edges of the world until all that matters is this island of warmth, this pool of life gathered around the fire. You start to understand the darkness differently, not as a lack of light, but as a cocoon, a protective blanket, a boundary that holds the world at bay. Inside this long, smoky hall, dimness isn't frightening. It's home, and you find yourself sinking comfortably into its quiet, golden glow. The longer you sit in this dim hall, the more one truth rises above all others like smoke from the hearth. The smell here is intense, not bad, not foul, just everything all at once. layered so deeply into the air that it feels like breathing in 1,000 years of Viking life with every inhale. It begins subtly, a whiff of wood smoke, a hint of stew, the wool on your cloak still radiating sheep energy. But then the rest of it follows, slowly, steadily, until your nose is experiencing a full-scale historical reenactment. You take a breath. Oh no. Oh yes, this is the Viking Longhouse fragrance. Rich, complex, impossible to escape. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Most Viking longhouses had no chimney, which meant smoke settled into the rafters and clung to every surface. Over time, the entire house developed a permanent smoky aroma. Wood baked into wool baked into skin, and skin baked into, well, you. The smoke isn't unpleasant. Actually, it's strangely comforting, but it mixes with other scents. And that's where things get interesting. To your left, the stew pot bubbles gently, releasing notes of barley, onion, maybe fish, maybe last week's leftover mystery. To your right, a sheep scratches itself against a post, adding a warm barnyard undertone. Behind you, someone oils a leather strap, filling the air with a musky, earthy scent. Someone else kneels by the fire, stirring coals that release sharp bursts of charcoal heat. A man walks past carrying drying cod. The cod contributes something assertive. Your first light joke of the section lands naturally. You realise that if smells could vote, the Viking Longhouse would be a chaotic democracy with no clear winner. A woman fans the hearth, and a new wave of smoke rolls your way, making your eyes sting. The Longhouse breathes through fragrance. The smell is not a side effect. It's the signature of life happening in close quarters. A quirky tidbit sparks in your mind. Some archaeologists suggest that Viking longhouses may have had large accumulations of soot and ash in the rafters that occasionally fell like dark snow during storms or loud arguments. You stare upward, half praying the ceiling doesn't sneeze on you. You shift slightly, and a child wanders by smelling strongly of outdoors, old bread, and I played in something I'm not supposed to. A dog follows, smelling like dog, wet paws, warm fur, and heroic levels of loyalty. The longer you sit, the more scents you begin to identify like a strange historical sommelier. Wood smoke, notes of pine and birch, sweat, aged to perfection, boiled vegetables, especially cabbage doing cabbage things, wool, exuding lanolin confidence, compressed humanity, vintage unknown, goat, always goat. Earth, tracked in on every shoe, salted fish, trying its absolute best. And then, drifting in from the darker end of the hall, the unmistakable scent of something drying. Meat, fish, herbs, laundry, possibly all four. Historians still argue whether Longhouse smells were overwhelming, normal for the time or simply accepted and unremarked upon. Some scholars argue that constant smoke masked a lot of the less pleasant odours. Others insist that humans adapt quickly to environmental smells, meaning Vikings probably just didn't notice after day 3. You, on the other hand, have been here for maybe 6 hours and are already negotiating with your sinuses. Someone opens the door briefly to let out smoke and let in fresh air. For one glorious second, a wave of cold, clean wind rushes in, slicing through the warmth and pushing the smells aside. You inhale deeply, then the door closes and the Longhouse aroma settles back over you like a familiar wool blanket. A heavy one, slightly damp, smelling faintly of livestock and heroic sagas. A woman beside you pulls out a small bundle of dried herbs and tosses a pinch into the fire. The smoke changes subtly. Lavender, juniper, something soothing at least. You inhale, grateful. She nods knowingly. Everyone here has their coping strategies. A man passes carrying boots that have seen better days. The boots introduce a new aroma. You lean back to give them space. He nods in return, grateful for your self-preservation and your nose's sacrifice. Your second joke drifts gently into your mind. If Viking families bottled this scent, they could have sold it as ode to survival. And yet, something changes. Slowly, gently, strangely. The smells blend into something warm, lived in, almost comforting. You start associating each scent with an action, a task, a moment of life in this hall. The odours aren't separate anymore, they're one continuous story. Smoke becomes warmth, stew becomes nourishment, Wool becomes safety, animals become companionship, earth becomes home. The longhouse stops smelling like a dozen competing scents and starts smelling like a single thing, a place full of life. Your third joke nudges in softly. You realise the longhouse doesn't smell bad. You just haven't lived here long enough to smell like everyone else. And as you sit there, wrapped in this tapestry of scent and sound, you breathe in deeply. Not because it smells perfect, but because it smells real. This is the fragrance of a world that survives the cold not through luxury but through togetherness. The fragrance of shared fire, shared meals, shared burdens. The fragrance of human life. Unfiltered, unedited and unforgettable. You're beginning to think you've adjusted to Viking Longhouse life. The darkness, the noise, the smells, the goats with boundary issues, when the weather decides to remind you exactly where you are. Because outside these wooden walls, the north has teeth, and it uses them. A sudden thrum of wind rattles the longhouse boards, sending a shiver through the entire structure. The fire flickers. A few sparks jump. Someone mutters something in Old Norse that almost certainly translates to, "Oh great, here we go again." You pull your cloak tighter. A draft snakes along the floor like a cold, invisible cat. The longhouse creaks under the pressure of the wind, and you finally understand a harsh truth about Viking life. Even inside, you're never fully warm. A mainstream historical fact floats forward. Viking longhouses were insulated with packed earth, turf, or layers of timber. But these houses still had drafts, lots of them. Heat gathered near the hearth, but the edges of the hall could be chilly even in high summer. In winter, your breath fogged the air inside your home. You stand and take a slow walk toward the longhouse door. The cold intensifies with every step, wrapping around your legs like icy fingers. When you're finally close enough, you can feel the wind pushing against the doorboards, trying to pry its way in. Someone nudges past you, checks for snow build-up at the threshold, then shoves a wad of wool fabric into a crack where the wind whistles through. It helps, a little. You look back at the room and realise how uneven the warmth is. Near the fire, people are comfortable, cheeks flushed, arms bare, stew simmering. But along the walls, people wear cloaks indoors, hats, fur-lined hoods. Children burrow under blankets like suspiciously cosy lumps of wool. Your first light joke of the section appears when you notice a goat standing closer to the fire than most humans. Because the goat has seniority, clearly. You ease back toward the hearth. The temperature difference is astonishing. 1 step, cold. 2 steps, cold. 3 steps, your eyelashes thaw. 4 steps, your face is roasting. It's like experiencing all 4 seasons in a single stroll. A quirky fact slips in. Archaeologists studying soot layers inside longhouses found evidence that smoke and heat would sometimes pool unevenly, creating microclimates. Warm pockets here, cold pockets there. Some corners could be used for storing perishables because they stayed so chilly. You find one of these cold pockets by accident when you sit down on a bench and immediately reconsider your life choices. The wood beneath you is freezing, like it's been storing winter gossip. You stand up again, quickly. Someone sees your shiver and gestures to a fur-draped bench near the fire. You accept the offer with the gratitude of someone who has just been rescued from the world's oldest icebox. From this warmer spot, you watch the longhouse adapt to the weather. People move closer together. A mother pulls her child into her lap. A man tightens his cloak, then leans his back toward the fire to warm his spine. Even the animals adjust. The cow nestles deeper into her straw, the sheep huddle nose to tail, and the goats. Well, the goats wander town like self-appointed comfort inspectors. Historians still argue whether longhouses were kept warm enough for comfort, or whether Vikings simply developed a supernatural tolerance for cold. Some evidence suggests large feasting halls were warm and cozy. Others argue the average home was barely above outdoor temperature on stormy nights. The truth likely varies, but right now your toes confirm the barely above freezing theory. Another gust of wind shakes the roof. The rafters groan. You tense instinctively, but no one else reacts. The longhouse has weathered far worse. To these people, this is just winter saying hello. Someone tosses more wood onto the fire. Sparks rise, dancing upward before disappearing into the smoke layer overhead. You inhale, feeling both warmed and mildly smoked, like a person-shaped piece of firewood. Your second joke comes gently. You realise that in the Viking world your survival strategy is roughly 60% wool, 40% proximity to fire, and 100% pretending you're not cold. You look toward the longhouse door again. The wind howls. Snowflakes blow in through the cracks, tiny sparkling specks that vanish instantly in the heated air. It's strangely beautiful, like nature knocking politely before trying to freeze you. A woman sits beside you and begins mending a cloak. Her fingers move methodically, sewing thick wool with thicker thread. She glances at the door, shakes her head, and mutters something that probably means this storm will last a while. And she's right. The longhouse darkens. The wind roars. The temperature dips just enough that everyone huddles a little closer, shoulders brushing, voices softening. Even the animals seem quieter, like they understand the storm is best endured together. You wrap your cloak around yourself, grateful for its weight even if it itches. The fire pops. Someone ladles hot broth into wooden cups. Steam curls toward the smoke hole like a prayer, and slowly the longhouse transforms from a noisy, bustling hub into a warm refuge, a shelter of flickering light in a world that has turned sharp and white and wild outside its walls. The weather may be unforgiving, the cold may never truly leave, the drafts may sneak in forever. But inside this smoky hall, surrounded by fur, fire, and human warmth, you're safe, you're sheltered, you are part of the longhouse now. The storm outside eventually quiets to a distant hum, and with it comes a subtle shift inside the longhouse, not in temperature, not in lighting, but in behaviour. Because the longer you stay here, the more you realise that Viking life isn't just about fire or food or survival, it's about people, and the invisible web of rules, expectations, obligations, and social dances that shape every moment inside this tightly shared space. You sit near the hearth watching as more people file in, a neighbour stopping by to share news, a visiting relative carrying a sack of barley, a traveller seeking shelter from the storm. No one ever knocks. Knocking isn't a thing. You simply appear in the doorway, shout a greeting, and hope you're welcome. Inside, the longhouse instantly rearranges itself to accommodate. Newcomers. People scoot over on benches. Someone hands the traveller a bowl. A child moves to sit closer to a parent. The seating shifts effortlessly, but not randomly. Because in a place like this, where 20 to 40 people may occupy one room, social order is everything. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Viking households operated with a clear hierarchy. The head of the farm, usually male, their spouse, extended family, foster children, servants, and occasionally honoured guests. Where you sat, slept and worked said everything about your place in the family. Social order was so deeply ingrained that even minor breaches could spark gossip, resentment, or the occasional dramatic saga-worthy feud. You notice this instantly. The head of the household sits near the high seat at the end of the hall, elevated slightly, framed by carved posts, with the best light and the least draught. Only close family or honoured guests sit adjacent. Everyone else adjusts accordingly, forming a living social map. You shift slightly on your bench, trying not to sit somewhere that accidentally signals, "Hello, I believe I own this farm now." A woman with a basket full of wool passes you and smiles politely. Friendly, but also assessing. Not distrustful, just aware. Because in this world, privacy doesn't exist, so awareness takes its place. Your first joke slips in quietly. The Viking Longhouse is basically a 24/7 group chat you can't leave. Children tumble through the hall, their play somehow simultaneously chaotic and respectful of the social flow. They weave between adults, but never across the high seat space. They chase goats, which is perhaps unavoidable, but avoid knocking into the elders or stepping on anyone's woodworking tools. It's an unwritten choreography learned through constant observation. Nearby, two men debate something in low voices. Not angrily, just firmly, likely discussing land boundaries, tool repairs, or who misplaced the axe for the 5th time. Arguments do happen here, but they're usually handled with a combination of calm pragmatism, patient sighs, and that universal Viking tone of, "Let's not burn the hall down about this." A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some sagas describe households using shared storytelling or reciting law codes at night to reinforce social order. Imagine sitting down to dinner and hearing someone say, "And now, for tonight's episode of Don't Steal Thy Neighbour's Sheep." Guests are treated well, often fed first, given a warm seat and included in conversation. Hospitality isn't just kindness, it's law, honour, survival. because in a land full of storms, isolation and danger, today's guest could be tomorrow's rescuer. But guests also know the rules. Don't wander the hall uninvited, don't touch the family's heirloom weapons, and definitely do not sit in the high seat, unless specifically told to. You glance at it again, shining faintly in the lamplight, like it's daring you. You resist. Barely. People around you return to their activities while talking softly, weaving stories with the same rhythm they weave cloth. You catch snippets, news from a distant fjord, gossip about a neighbour's new boat, laughter over something a child said earlier. Voices overlap in gentle waves, never quite quiet, never quite loud. Historians still argue whether Viking households were more egalitarian than other medieval societies. Some point to women's ownership rights and the value of domestic labour. Others highlight the strict hierarchy within the hall. The truth is probably a bit of both, a society balanced between practicality and tradition. You watch as a teenage girl respectfully offers her seat to an elder, who accepts with a nod that carries the weight of custom. You watch as a servant quietly refills bowls but is never ignored. You watch as a visiting traveller thanks the household head with a gesture that probably translates to, "I owe you one." And slowly something starts to make sense. All these unspoken rules, seating, sharing, speaking, hosting, are what hold the Longhouse together. This isn't a space where people merely coexist. It's a space where every action communicates respect, belonging, and survival. Your second joke arrives gently. In the Viking world, sitting in the wrong spot is the medieval equivalent of replying all to a message meant for one person. A young woman hands you a cup of warm milk. You accept it with both hands, the polite way, and nod your gratitude. She returns the nod. A tiny, quiet exchange, but meaningful. Then, without warning, the Longhouse shifts again. Someone announces visitors approaching through the storm. The household adjusts, benches move, stew is ladled, furs are shaken out, and space is cleared near the fire. Everyone understands the choreography. Everyone knows their part. And you, wrapped in wool, warmed by firelight, and guided by the soft murmur of voices, finally feel like you understand it too. This isn't just a building. It's a community, a hierarchy, a family. Wide, woven, and wonderfully alive. You sip your warm milk and smile. You found your place in the Longhouse. As evening stretches slowly across the sky, the Longhouse shifts once again. But this time, the transformation is gentler, softer, almost magical. The chores wind down, tools are put away, loom weights stop clacking, children stop thundering through the hall like tiny berserkers. Even the goats somehow decide to calm down. Because now comes one of the most cherished parts of Viking life, the evening stories, songs, and quiet bonding that carry the Longhouse from daylight into darkness. It begins with a subtle lowering of voices, not silence, the Longhouse never has true silence, but a collective exhale as everyone settles close to the hearth. People gather furs, reposition stools, shift benches a little nearer to the fire's glow. The lamps are trimmed, their tiny flames flickering like timid stars. Someone adds a small log to the fire, not enough to blaze, just enough to warm the circle and light faces in soft amber. Shadows spill across beams, smoke curls lazily, the air feels thick with anticipation. You slip into a spot near the hearth, wrapped in your cloak, feeling the day's weight ease out of your shoulders. The atmosphere becomes cozy. Not comfortable by modern standards, maybe, but deeply, richly human. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Vikings treasured oral storytelling. In the evenings, longhouses became communal libraries, places where sagas, poems, genealogies, news, jokes, legends, and legal codes were shared aloud. This wasn't entertainment alone. It was culture, memory, education, and identity. Tonight, you're about to experience that firsthand. An older man clears his throat, the universal sign that story hour is about to begin. The children scramble to sit closer, eyes wide, hands fidgeting with excitement. Adults lean back, relaxing in ways they haven't all day. Even the animals seem to hush, settling into soft breathing and gentle rustles. The storyteller begins. His voice is low, steady, carrying across the hall like warm smoke. He launches into a tale of Thor travelling in disguise, of giants trying to trick him, of Loki causing mischief, and of strength measured not in muscle but in cleverness. His hands move as he speaks, emphasizing each turn. The fire mirrors his gestures, flaring with bright bursts and dimming as the story darkens. Everyone listens, you do too. The rhythm of the tale carries you, like a small boat slipping along a dark fjord. The words paint images, vast mountains, stormy seas, colossal beasts, determined gods, all of it unfolding inside this long, smoky hall. The fact that none of this is written down, that all of it lives in voices and memory, makes it feel fragile and sacred. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some Viking storytellers use small carved memory staffs, wooden sticks with notches or symbols meant to jog their recollection. You scan the storyteller's hands, wondering if the carved walking stick beside him is really a memory tool in disguise. The story shifts, lightens, deepens again. The children gasp at dramatic moments, laugh at Loki's antics, and huddle closer during the tense parts. Adults smile softly, murmuring comments under their breath. A man across from you mouths the words ahead of the storyteller. He's clearly heard this tale 100 times, maybe more, but he still loves every moment. Your first light joke of this section drifts in. You realize Viking Story Night is basically Netflix, if Netflix required perfect memory and the occasional heroic mustache. When the saga ends, there's a warm ripple of appreciation, nods, murmurs, children reenacting dramatic sword swings. Then, naturally, someone else begins another tale. This time, a woman shares a funny story about a neighbour's stubborn goat. Everyone laughs, loudly, because goats are universal agents of chaos, and humanity has been complaining about them since the dawn of civilization. The mood lightens, people relax. A teenage girl begins humming, soft at first, then stronger. Her voice is bright and clear, a thin ribbon of melody weaving through the smoky air. Soon others join in, men and women adding low harmonies, children humming the parts they know, even one goat releasing a perfectly timed bleat that earns a round of laughter. Historians still argue whether Viking songs followed structured melodies or were improvised based on poetic meter. Some believe they use simple, repetitive tunes. Others argue for more complex patterns. Reconstructionists demonstrate both with passionate devotion. But tonight, what you hear sounds timeless, a simple, haunting lull that wraps around the hall like another layer of wool. As the song fades, people fall into quiet conversation. Not the noisy bustle of daytime, but soft, peaceful murmurs, stories shared, jokes whispered, days reflected on. You look around and realize something profound. This is the Longhouse at its most human, at its warmest, at its gentlest. Gone is the rushed energy of chores. Gone is the chaos of children and animals darting everywhere. Gone is the wind battering the boards. What remains is connection, woven through stories and songs, laughter and memory. Your second joke settles in. You realize that if someone tried to start a Viking open mic night, it would immediately become the hottest event in Scandinavia. The fire softens to glowing embers. A woman yawns, stretching her arms. A man nods off mid-conversation. Children begin drifting toward their sleeping spots, clutching blankets and half-formed dreams of giants and gods. You watch the last spark rise from the hearth and disappear into the smoky rafters. This is how Vikings ended their days, together, warmed by stories, wrapped in song, held by the soft camaraderie of shared struggle and shared comfort. Your third joke comes softly. You're pretty sure this Longhouse bonding time has better vibes than most modern dinner parties, and significantly, fewer awkward conversations about taxes. As you settle into your own place for the night, the voices fade, the hall darkens, and the Longhouse slips into a peaceful rhythm. Today, you learned what Vikings worked for. Tonight, you learn what they lived for. The Longhouse grows quieter as the evening stories fade into warm memory, but not everyone heads straight to sleep. Because once the children have been tucked under furs and the elders have settled into their resting spots, the Longhouse reveals another layer of itself, one that hums softly in the dimness. You start to notice it when a faint clink, clink, clink echoes from the darker corner near the wall. It's rhythmic, steady, unmistakable, the sound of a hammer tapping metal. Someone is still working. Because in a Viking household, even nighttime doesn't fully stop the crafts that keep this world running. You stand and drift toward the sound, careful not to trip over a sleeping goat or a child who has become a blanket lump. The darkness near the wall is thinly lit by a single oil lamp, its flame trembling as if nervous about being the only source of clarity in this shadowed realm. And there, seated cross-legged with tools laid neatly in a half-circle, is the blacksmith. Not the grand forge of legends, not the roaring fire of epic sagas. This is a modest, portable setup for fine work, repairing small tools, fixing hinges, sharpening blades, shaping hooks or rivets. The bigger ironwork is done outside or in an actual workshop. But small, delicate tasks, those happen here, in the Longhouse itself, where warmth, light, and company all blend into one. A mainstream historical fact rises gently in your mind. Viking longhouses often contained multi-purpose craft spaces, where everything from sewing to smithing to wood carving to textile work could happen, depending on weather, season, and necessity. These weren't separate rooms, just designated zones, carved out of communal space through habit and respect. You kneel beside the blacksmith, careful not to interfere. The glow from the lamp makes the iron shimmer faintly. He heats a small piece of metal in a tiny portable coal pan, then taps it with a hammer no bigger than your hand. Tap, turn, tap, breathe. It's more meditative than dramatic, the quiet kind of metalwork that keeps a farmstead functioning rather than outfitting a warband. You almost whisper something, then decide silence is safer. The blacksmith gives you a brief knowing smile, the kind that says, "Yes, this does look mysterious and impressive. I am aware." A quirky tidbit surfaces. Archaeologists have found that many Viking farms had small-scale smithing equipment inside the living area. Not for forging swords, that required a full forge, but for repairing everyday items like buckles, nails, needles, and hinges. A longhouse was basically a medieval multi-tool. You shift slightly and notice the space beside him contains an entirely different world of craft. A woman sits with a small pile of spindle whorls, spinning wool into thread. Her movements are steady, patient, hypnotic, the spindle twirling with rhythmic grace. The faint whirring sound is so soft you almost mistake it for the purring of a very small, very judgmental cat. Next to her, a young man carves a wooden bowl, shavings piling at his feet like curly blonde feathers. His knife glides along the wood, coaxing smooth curves from rough grain. The firelight catches on the pale shavings, making them look almost golden. And beyond him, another woman mends a fishing net, fingers dancing expertly over the knots, tightening, looping, whispering to herself to keep track of the pattern. Your first joke of this section drifts in as you take in all these parallel crafts. The Longhouse is basically a medieval co-working space, minus the overpriced coffee and startup pitch decks. People here don't need caffeine. They run on duty and habit and the strange comforting hum of communal productivity. The air carries small pockets of concentrated craftsmanship, the smell of heated metal, the drift of wood dust, the faint must of wool, the quiet scrape of bone tools on hide. Historians still argue whether specific craft corners were permanent or temporary. Some believe households had fixed areas for textile work. Others argue that the Longhouse's open design allowed crafts to migrate as needs changed. The truth is likely both, a flexible system shaped by weather, season, and available light. A goat wanders past you, sniffs a pile of wood shavings, and decides they are not edible. Good. The last thing anyone needs is a goat that has tasted woodworking. The blacksmith finishes his task and quenches the glowing metal in a small bowl of water. Steam curls upward, catching the lamp's glow. He examines the piece, nods with satisfaction, then sets it carefully aside. Another tool saved, another task complete. You watch as the workers gradually rotate their tasks. The man carving wood shifts closer to the hearth for better light. The woman spinning wool switches to braiding cord. Someone brings over a half-finished bone comb and resumes filing its teeth one by one. It strikes you then. The Longhouse is never idle. Even in the quietest hours, the household continues to weave, carve, shape, mend, and create. Survival here is not a matter of occasional effort. It's a steady, lifelong rhythm. Your second joke appears softly. You realize everyone in this Longhouse has at least 3 more skills than you, and 2 of them involve knives. You glance again at the craftspeople. their calm focus, the way their hands move automatically, the comfort they take in routine. Here, creativity and necessity are the same thing. A poorly mended cloak is a cold night. A badly carved bowl is a lost serving dish. A broken metal clasp is time, materials, and warmth sacrificed. There is no disposable culture here. Nothing is wasted. Everything is repaired, repurposed, reinvented. You feel a soft pride warm the air as someone lifts the bowl they've been carving, displays it to an elder, and receives an approving nod. A small victory, but meaningful. Your third joke slips in with a smile. If Vikings invented IKEA, everything would last 200 years and require zero assembly. The crafts slowly wind down, tools are put away, shavings swept, lamps dimmed, the air grows still. You rise, stretching your legs, feeling the heaviness of the day settle into your bones, but also the quiet, satisfying sense that life here has its own simple genius. The Longhouse is more than a shelter. It's a workshop, a studio, a classroom, a forge. And tonight, under the low glow of the lamps, you saw how Viking hands shaped not just tools, but their entire world. Just when you think the Longhouse is finally winding down for the night, the fire low, the adults yawning, the crafters putting away their tools, a sound breaks the calm, a thump, a giggle, a suspiciously fast patter of feet. And then comes the unmistakable chorus of small voices trying very hard not to be loud, which of course makes them even louder. You turn your head and see the source of the chaos, the children, who have apparently decided that bedtime is more of a flexible suggestion than a requirement. And suddenly, you understand a truth deeper than any saga. In a Viking Longhouse, children do not go to bed. Children exist loudly until gravity defeats them. A little girl races past you clutching a wooden toy horse. A boy follows her, tripping over absolutely nothing, landing face first in a pile of furs, and immediately popping back up with the resilience of someone who has never experienced lower back pain. A toddler toddles through the middle of everything, holding a wooden spoon like a royal scepter, bonking objects and people with it in a benevolent but relentless inspection. You smile. This is the Viking bedtime hour. A mainstream historical fact appears. Viking families were large, with multiple generations often sharing one longhouse. Children learned by watching, copying, and participating, which meant they were everywhere, doing everything all the time. Childhood was not separate from adult life. It blended into it like smoke into the rafters. You watch as the older kids help the younger ones climb onto the sleeping platforms. Some flop dramatically onto blankets. Others negotiate possession of a favourite fur with the seriousness of international diplomats. A mother tries to gather her 3 children, but one wiggles away like a greased eel. Another is suddenly hungry again. The third is pretending to be asleep while fully upright. Your first joke arrives gently. Bedtime in a Viking Longhouse has the same energy as herding cats, if the cats were wearing wool tunics and had unlimited stamina. Just as things start to settle, the chaos spikes again, because the children find a goat. The goat, to its credit, is minding its own business. The children are not. They swarm it with the enthusiasm of tiny warriors discovering a new source of entertainment. The goat bleats indignantly, then trots away as if filing a formal complaint with the household gods. You watch all of this with quiet awe. How does anything get done here? How does anyone sleep here? The answer reveals itself in real time. Vikings simply adapted. Children were a part of the Longhouse ecosystem, unpredictable, energetic, loud, and utterly essential. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Archaeologists have found small carved toys, miniature boats, tiny swords, and even little wooden animals in Viking settlements. Children played constantly, and their toys were often handmade by parents or older siblings as practice for more serious crafts. You spot evidence of this now. A boy proudly brandishing a wooden axe that looks remarkably like a stick, but is wielded with total conviction. A girl uses a piece of twine as a jump rope. A toddler drags a carved duck on a string, the duck thumping along behind her with unwavering loyalty. An older woman chuckles softly, shaking her head as 2 children squabble over a fur. She steps in, mediates with the diplomatic finesse of someone who has brokered 1,000 such treaties, and restores household harmony within seconds. Historians still argue whether Viking households were strictly authoritarian or more flexible when it came to raising kids. Some sagas show stern discipline. Others depict parents laughing at mischief or indulging clever jokes. Evidence suggests a mix. Firm expectations, but plenty of room for chaos. One thing is certain. Children here grow up fast. Not in a harsh way, in a necessary way. You watch a boy no older than 10 help feed embers into the hearth, with the confidence of someone trusted with real responsibility. A girl carefully helps her mother adjust a lamp wick. Another child checks on the sheep like a tiny shepherd in training. Your second joke drifts in. Viking kids have more real-world skills at age 8 than you had at 28. But even with all their competence, they're still children. Small whirlwinds of joy, noise, confusion, curiosity, and mischief. A little girl approaches you and offers you a woven doll with one missing arm. She stares at you with solemn expectation. You thank her. She nods once, satisfied, then sprints away to join a game that seems to have no rules, objectives, or ending. You place the doll beside you carefully. Across the hall, the parents finally gain the upper hand. Children are tucked under furs. A lullaby begins. Soft, rhythmic, soothing. It ripples through the room like warm wind. Lalul, lalul. The melody is simple, ancient, born from generations of voices shaping the same tune. The children's eyes droop. Their bodies relax. One by one, the tiny whirlwinds collapse into peaceful sleep. A boy mumbles something about giants. A girl clutches her. Wooden horse. The toddler faceplants into a fur and begins snoring instantly. The longhouse exhales. Quiet returns. Not complete quiet, never complete quiet, but the gentler, deeper quiet of a space filled with sleeping children. Your third joke lands softly. You realize the Viking Longhouse doesn't need a soundtrack. The kids provide one for free. As you watch the small shapes curled under blankets, a sense of warmth settles into your chest. In this crowded, smoky, chaotic hall, childhood blooms without walls, without isolation, without distance. The children grow up surrounded by stories, work, warmth, laughter, and countless watchful eyes. They are part of everything, from dawn to dusk. And tonight, for the first time, you see the Longhouse not just as a shelter or a workshop or a noisy communal room, but as a home. A home filled with tiny, messy, irreplaceable reminders of life continuing. The Longhouse settles into its late evening hush. The children finally asleep, the air warm with embers and steady breathing. But beneath that calm lies another constant reality of Viking life, one that never fully sleeps, never fully waits, and never fully leaves anyone alone. Illness, aches, coughs, fevers, injuries, all the daily bruises and burdens of living in a world without modern medicine. You're reminded of this when a soft cough breaks the stillness, then another, deeper one from across the hall. Not alarming, not panicked, just part of the soundscape as familiar as the crackle of the hearth. Someone shifts beside their sleeping spot. Another person murmurs quietly, adjusting a blanket around a child who's warm with fever. You sit up a little straighter, suddenly noticing how many small remedies and daily healing tasks unfold quietly in this hall. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Vikings relied heavily on herbal medicine, midwifery, and traditional healing knowledge passed through generations. They had no surgeons, not in the modern sense, no hospitals and no sterile environments. Their medicine was equal parts practical herbcraft, wise intuition and spiritual protection. You watch as an older woman, the healer of the household by the look of her, kneels beside a man with a bandaged arm. She unwraps the linen carefully, inspecting a long, healing cut. He winces but doesn't protest. The wound looks clean, surprisingly so, and she nods approvingly. She applies a salve smelling of honey and herbs, then wraps it again with practiced hands. The honey catches your attention, sweet, thick, soothing, and you recall another real fact. Vikings used honey and honey-based salves as antiseptics. Honey kills bacteria. Honey preserves wounds. Honey keeps infection at bay. Long before modern science confirmed it, the Norse were already relying on it. You shift closer, trying to observe without intruding. The healer grinds dried herbs in a small stone bowl, mixing them with animal fat to form a paste. The smell is earthy, sharp, almost minty. She gestures for someone to fetch water warmed in a clay pot by the fire. The rhythm of her work is slow, steady, deeply familiar. She has done this 1,000 times. A quirky tidbit arrives. Some Viking remedies involved charms or whispered incantations alongside the herbs. Words mattered. Belief mattered. Healing wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, woven from both plants and prayers. Archaeologists have found small, healing amulets carved with runes meant to ward off sickness or summon strength. You spot one now, a tiny rune-etched piece of bone tied around a child's wrist. Protective, symbolic, comforting to both parent and child. The healer moves again, this time toward a woman sitting upright, pale and tired. She hands the woman a cup of something warm. The woman sips it carefully, eyes half closed. You catch a whiff. Chamomile, maybe. Wild mint. Something soothing and restorative. Meanwhile, a man seated by the wall quietly massages his own shoulder, rotating it with a grimace. Another person wraps their ankle with a wool strip. A young woman plucks splinters from her finger after a long day weaving or carving. Everywhere you look, people attending to the small injuries of Viking life. Your first gentle joke arrives. You realise the Longhouse isn't just a home. It's also a walk-in clinic with a very flexible payment plan. A soft moan draws your attention to another corner. A child tosses under their blanket, cheeks flushed. Their mother soothes them, humming a tune that sounds like a lullaby mixed with a prayer. The healer brings a small pouch of something fragrant and places it near the child's head. You lean closer, dried juniper, one of the Norse favourites for clearing the air and easing breathing. The child relaxes, the mother exhales. The healer nods. Historians still argue whether Viking illness was as rampant as some sources claim. Some point to archaeological evidence of trauma, malnutrition and disease. Others argue Vikings were healthier than many medieval populations due to their active lifestyle, diverse diets, and relative cleanliness. The truth is complex. Life here was physically demanding, but also nurtured by community care, and you can see that now. Every cough has someone listening. Every wound has someone tending. Every fever has someone soothing. Your second joke slips in. If modern urgent care clinics ran like Viking Longhouses, the waiting room would just be someone handing you an herbal tea and telling you stories until you felt better. You notice that healing here isn't hurried, it's not frantic, it's woven into everyday life. A man grinds herbs while talking about fishing nets. A woman stitches clothing between tending to her child's cough. The healer herself works calmly, as though illness is just another chore, one that must be met with knowledge, patience, and steady hands. When someone groans from across the hall, the healer rises again. She moves through the dimness like a quiet guardian, her shadow stretching long behind her. You follow with your eyes as she tends to an elderly woman's aching knees, rubbing them with warm oil made from animal fat mixed with herbs. The woman sighs in relief, murmuring thanks. You're struck by the intimacy of this space, how care is a communal act, how vulnerability is not hidden behind walls or curtains. Illness happens in the open, met with empathy rather than embarrassment. A man beside you takes a deep breath and mutters something about needing to burn away the cold from his chest. He pulls a blanket closer, sips warm broth, and listens as people around him share remedies their grandparents used. Advice flows freely in the way stories do, part science, part superstition, part comfort. A boy with a bruised knee limps over to you and proudly shows off the poultice tied around his leg. He explains with absolute confidence that it's made from crushed plantain and moss. You nod seriously, as though consulting a medical textbook. He beams. Your third light joke lands softly. If Viking children had social media, they'd post herbal remedy tutorials with the caption "Works 100%, trust me, I'm 8." As the healer finally settles back down, exhaustion tugging at her shoulders, the Longhouse dips deeper into nighttime quiet. The fire pops gently. People shift into more comfortable sleeping positions. The air fills with the warm, heavy scent of herbs mingling with smoke, and you realize something deeply human, deeply old, deeply unchanged. Sickness is part of every age. But so is care, so is comfort, so is the quiet strength of people caring for their own. In this Longhouse, healing isn't a dramatic event. It's a shared responsibility, a nightly ritual, a testament to survival, tenderness, and the bonds that hold this world together. By the time the household grows still again, the healer finally resting her hands and the last murmurs fading into the smoky air, the Longhouse feels like it's slipping into sleep. but you quickly learn that Viking life has one more transformation, one that doesn't happen every night, but when it does, the entire hall becomes something else entirely. Because when a feast day or seasonal festival approaches, the Longhouse awakens in a whole new way, and tonight, you're about to witness that shift begin. It starts subtly, a low ripple of energy, a few excited murmurs. Someone mentions the coming observance, a celebration of the harvest, or the turning of winter toward spring, or perhaps honouring a local god or ancestor. The exact meaning varies by region and time, but the result is always the same. The Longhouse becomes a gathering place not just for survival, but for joy. A mainstream historical fact rises gently. Viking festivals often revolved around major seasonal markers: Yule, harvest feasts, midwinter blots, spring fertility rites, and gatherings dedicated to specific gods like Freyr or Thor. These weren't quiet dinners. They were major social events where food, drink, song, sacrifice, stories, and community all merged into a single pulsing evening. And you can feel that anticipation now. People begin pulling out stored food saved specifically for such nights: smoked meats, dried fish, apples kept in cool storage pits, precious honey, and grain reserved for special ale. The mood shifts from weary to energized, as though the walls themselves have straightened their posture in readiness. A man places a carved drinking horn near the hearth, with a level of ceremony that suggests this horn is absolutely not for everyday stew duty. A woman brings out a cloth-wrapped bundle containing spices, maybe cinnamon or imported pepper, rare luxuries that hint at trade routes stretching across oceans. Children, suddenly re-energized despite how recently they fell, asleep peek out from their blankets. One sits up, hair wild, eyes shining. The promise of a feast is stronger than any lullaby. Your first light joke arrives easily. Even half-asleep Viking kids have the same reaction we do when someone whispers, "There might be dessert." The Longhouse brightens, not because someone adds more lamps, but because people move with purpose, stirring activity back into the air. A man sharpens a carving knife. A woman rolls dough between her palms. Someone brings bundles of herbs to mask the everyday smell of smoke and livestock, hanging them from the rafters like garlands. Livestock shift uncertainly, as if they too sense that something special is coming, though hopefully not too special. You give the sheep a reassuring pat. It stares back with mild concern. A quirky tidbit emerges. Some feast days involved ritual toasts. The first to the gods, the second to the ancestors, the third to the people present. Sagas describe elaborate sequences of drinking, storytelling, and boasting. The brugfull, or pledge cup, was sometimes passed around, encouraging guests to make bold promises about future deeds. You promise yourself not to swear anything you can't deliver, like rowing across the North Sea or wrestling a fjord troll. As preparations continue, the Longhouse undergoes a physical transformation. Benches are cleared, space is made near the centre hearth. Someone tosses aromatic herbs directly onto the fire, sending up fragrant smoke, juniper maybe, or dried pine needles. The smell is crisp, bright, almost festive. Historians still argue whether specific rituals happened inside or outside the Longhouse. Some evidence shows outdoor altars for sacrifices and ceremonies. Others point to saga descriptions of feasts held within the largest halls. The truth likely varied, but tonight this Longhouse is absolutely becoming a feast hall. People begin donning their better clothing, not silk or velvet, those luxuries are for kings, but cleaner tunics, brighter colours, cloaks brushed free of lint, brooches polished until they reflect firelight. Even the children fuss with their garments, preening like tiny nobles. You glance down at yourself and attempt to look slightly less like someone who lost a prolonged battle with a wool warehouse. It works. Not at all, but you try. Your second joke lands softly. You realise Vikings invented the original "I have nothing to wear" feeling, except their entire wardrobe consisted of 3 tunics and a cloak. The noise level rises. Someone tests a drum made from stretched animal hide. Another person plucks at a lyre. The notes wobble at first, then soar. A young woman practices a line of a poem under her breath, likely preparing to recite it later. A man comments loudly that he intends to outdrink his cousin this year, prompting another man to point out that the cousin isn't even here. "Exactly," he says proudly. "Victory is guaranteed." The Longhouse is warmer now, literally and emotionally. The storm outside has quieted, but in here a different weather builds. Bright, buzzing, communal. Children gather near the hearth, wide awake again, trying to peek into the pot where something new simmers, richer, thicker, more fragrant than the everyday pottage. Adults laugh, hands busy, faces animated. Even the animals seem calmer, lulled by the rising heat and voices. You sit among them, watching, absorbing, smiling. This isn't the longhouse of daily survival. This is the longhouse of celebration, of reward, of rest, of community, of remembrance, of belonging. Your third joke floats gently into your mind. If Vikings had refrigerators, feast days would still involve someone saying, "No, don't eat that. We're saving it for the celebration." A man walks past carrying a carved ceremonial bowl. A woman follows with a bundle of greenery. Someone lights another lamp, its glow feeding the joyous warmth, and gradually, beautifully, the longhouse shifts from dim domestic space to festive hall. A heartbeat with a faster rhythm, a story with brighter ink, a home expanding into something grand. You breathe in the scent of herbs, hearthfire and anticipation, and feel the energy rise. Feast night is coming, and you're about to see the longhouse at its most radiant. As the longhouse warms with the rising pulse of impending celebration, another shift begins to stir. Something quieter, older, deeper than the bustle of cooking or the clatter of drinking horns. It slips into the room like a familiar shadow, a soft reverence, a subtle straightening of backs, a hush that isn't fear but respect. Because beneath the noise, beneath the stew pots, beneath the laughter and the wool and the lingering scent of juniper, Viking life rests on an invisible foundation. Faith, ritual, the unseen, the household spirits, the gods who listen, the ancestors who linger. You feel it as soon as an elder walks toward the high seat carrying a small carved object, a simple wooden figure polished by countless hands. The longhouse collectively exhales, conversations quiet, children instinctively soften their voices, even the animals seem to pause. Something sacred is happening. A mainstream historical fact rises in your thoughts. Viking spirituality was woven into daily life, not separated into distant temples or weekly services. The longhouse itself was often a site of ritual, the hearth a sacred centre, the high seat symbolic of ancestral authority, the threshold a guarded boundary where spirits could enter or be turned away. You watch as the elder places the wooden figure, perhaps representing a household spirit, a land vetir, or maybe a small icon of Thor or Freya, on a raised platform near the fire. A small bowl of ale is poured as an offering. The gesture is simple, but the air changes, thickening with meaning. You realise something subtle. The longhouse isn't just a house, it's a spiritual landscape. A woman begins murmuring a few lines of old ritual verse, the Norse words curling into the rafters like smoke. Others bow their heads slightly, each person honouring the moment in their own way, some through prayer, some through silence, some through simply being present. Your first light joke arrives gently. You suddenly feel like you should stop breathing so loudly, just in case you accidentally offend a 1,000-year-old spirit. A man approaches carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside are herbs, bits of bone, a piece of carved antler, maybe dried berries, offerings for protection. He places the bundle near the hearthstone, tapping it twice with his fingers. A gesture of respect, a gesture of warding, a gesture repeated over centuries. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Archaeologists have found tiny house spirit figurines hidden in the corners of Old Norse homes, tucked behind support posts under thresholds or buried beneath floorboards, little guardians watching over daily life, like spiritual roommates with excellent attendance records. You glance around, wondering how many unseen watchers linger in the dimness. Nearby, a woman ties a small charm above the doorway, a loop of twisted straw mixed with a sprig of dried nettle. It's meant to discourage illness, misfortune, or unfriendly spirits. You notice several others throughout the hall, carved runes on support beams, herbs hung in patterns, woven knots tucked into rafters. This place is a fortress of old belief. Historians still argue whether these household rituals were primarily practical, symbolic, or deeply religious. Some say they were woven into survival, ways to psychologically anchor households facing harsh winters and unpredictable futures. Others argue they were expressions of a deeply animistic worldview, where every tree, river, and roof beam had a spirit worth honouring. The truth, as always, is complicated, and tonight you see that complexity come alive. A man steps forward, lifts a drinking horn, and offers a low toast to ancestors. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a few quiet words spoken with sincerity. Others echo him softly. It's not a grand event. It's the kind of ritual that doesn't need spectacle. You feel a warmth spread through the hall that has nothing to do with the fire. Your second joke slips in lightly. You realise that in a Viking home, even drinking has spiritual patch notes. The elder sits again, nodding as if satisfied that the proper balance has been restored. People resume their preparations for the feast, but with new focus, new calm, as though the spiritual gears of the house have just been oiled. A young woman sits by the wall carving a small piece of driftwood. At first you think it's a toy, until you see the rune etched on its surface. A protective charm likely meant to guard a newborn or keep someone safe on a journey. Another man chants softly while tying a knot into a strip of leather, his voice deep and steady. You can't understand the words, but you can feel the rhythm. A heartbeat inside a prayer. A child approaches you with a tiny carved horse. She presses it into your hand with absolute seriousness and whispers something that sounds like, "Against trolls." You nod solemnly. You take your new anti-troll device very seriously. You tuck it into your cloak. Your third joke arrives gently. You are now the proud owner of a magical horse talisman, which is more than you expected to achieve in Viking Scandinavia. The Longhouse glows warmly now, not just from firelight, but from the weight of shared belief. Ritual here is less about ceremony and more about connection, to past, present, future, and the unseen forces that watch over the hearth. And as laughter resumes, as stew simmers, as people return to their tasks with lighter shoulders, you realize something important. The Vikings didn't separate the sacred from the ordinary. The sacred was the ordinary, woven into furs, into food, into benches, into breath. In this hall, faith isn't a distant place. It's the glow of the hearth. It's the whisper near the doorway. It's the carved charm in your palm. And as you sit there, warmed by fire and belief, you feel it too. This Longhouse is alive, in body, in spirit, in memory. The Longhouse still hums with the soft afterglow of ritual, a warmth that has nothing to do with fire and everything to do with belonging, when another rhythm begins to unfold, not sudden, not loud, just steady, predictable, seasonal. Because Viking life isn't simply a collection of daily routines, it's a circle shaped by the land itself. The Longhouse breathes differently in summer than in winter. Its shadows fall differently in spring than in autumn. The people inside shift their habits, their workloads, their entire identities depending on what the seasons demand. You sense this change now, the way a tide changes direction long before the waves notice. A mainstream historical fact rises. Viking households lived by a seasonal calendar where every few months brought a complete transformation of duties. Summer meant farming, fishing, raiding, trading, repairing boats, and drying hay. Autumn meant harvesting, slaughtering livestock, preserving food. Winter meant weaving, carving, storytelling, and surviving storms. Spring meant birthing animals, ploughing fields, and preparing for new voyages. You realize that tonight, nestled between storm and feast, you're witnessing the subtle shift between winter's endurance and spring's anticipation. People begin pulling out tools that have been quiet for months. A man dusts off a plough blade, running his thumb thoughtfully along its edge. A woman checks the seeds stored in clay pots, murmuring to herself as she counts. A young man oils a rope, testing its strength for boating season. The Longhouse is preparing. Children feel the shift too. They talk excitedly about when the sheep will lamb, when the river will thaw, when the world will stop feeling like a giant freezer with a smoke hole. One child insists spring is already here. Another points out that their toes still feel like frozen turnips. Both seem equally correct. Your first gentle joke slips in. Viking children do not measure seasons by calendars. They measure them by the temperature of their feet. You stretch your legs, feeling the packed earth floor beneath you, realizing how much this building changes depending on the month. In winter, it's a fortress against the cold. In summer, it's a refuge from rain and wind. In autumn, it's a storage chest bursting with food. In spring, It's a staging ground for new life. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some longhouses had small alcoves or side rooms used differently depending on the season. In winter, they held sleeping furs. In summer, they stored herbs or tools. Archaeologists still debate the exact purpose of some of these spaces. Were they workrooms, guest beds, grain storage? The truth is murky, but the adaptability is undeniable. You watch as the longhouse shifts around you. The livestock, restless with the promise of warmer days, shuffle and snort. You see a sheep nudge a child's hand, demanding a scratch. The child obliges with a sigh that says, "I do this, hourly." A man discusses fishing conditions with another. They talk about ice thickness, wind patterns, when the fjord might finally unfreeze. Their voices carry the weary optimism of men who have survived many winters. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly dreaded winter or simply adapted to it with stoic acceptance. Some evidence shows winter festivals full of cheer. Other sources describe starving seasons, harsh storms, and long months of darkness. The truth lies, as usual, in between. Winter was both hardship and hearthlight. Tonight you can feel both truths. The longhouse is weary, but it is hopeful. A woman near the fire begins mending a summer tunic, its lighter fabric a faint promise of warmer days. Another begins sorting tools into piles labelled, in her head, not in writing, needs fixing, still works, and burn this, it's cursed. Your second joke arrives naturally. You realise Viking spring cleaning has the same energy as modern spring cleaning, except their version involves weapons and livestock. People move with renewed purpose, talking about which fields will thaw first, which boats need repair, which journeys will begin once the ice releases its grip on the world. The air feels lighter, not warm yet, but suggestive. Even the longhouse smells different, a little less like winter smoke, a little more like fresh-cut herbs and newly mended wool. You step toward the doorway, where someone has cracked the door open. A sliver of outside air slips in, crisp and tinged with the faintest scent of melting snow. It's almost imperceptible, but to a household that's endured the dark months, it's a promise. You stand there, breathing it in, feeling the longhouse shift behind you, like a living creature waking from hibernation. A teen boy approaches, carrying fishing nets he's been repairing all winter. He shakes them out, examining each knot. "Soon," he mutters, mostly to himself. His eyes shine with the restless energy of someone who has been cooped up too long. A woman brings over a wooden box filled with seeds, barley, rye, flax. She handles them with reverence. These aren't just seeds. They're survival. They're hope. They're the future of the longhouse. Your third light joke appears gently. You realise Vikings didn't wait for warm weather. They just decided, we're going outside now, whether nature likes it or not. You step away from the doorway and back into the warm heartbeat of the hall. People continue their preparations, talking softly, working steadily, dreaming quietly. The longhouse breathes in winter. It breathes out spring. And you suddenly understand that living here isn't about enduring one day at a time. It's about belonging to an endless cycle, a rhythm older than sagas, a pattern carved into earth, wood, and memory. Seasons don't just change the land. They change the people. They change the longhouse. They change you. And tonight, nestled within this ancient cycle, you feel the shifting tide of time itself. The longhouse has carried you through an entire cycle of Viking life. Noise and warmth and smoke and chores and laughter and storms and stories. And now, as the night leans into its deepest, quietest hour, the whole structure seems to exhale. The feast preparations are paused. The charms have been hung. The tools have been stowed. The children are limp with sleep. Even the goats have given up their nightly mischief. And what settles over the longhouse now is something softer than silence, a kind of communal rest that only comes when dozens of lives breathe in the same rhythm. You sit by the dying hearth, feeling the last of its warmth brush against your shins. The embers glow like tiny red eyes watching over the hall. Shadows stretch long and thin. Every now and then a spark pops, but even that seems quieter now, respectful somehow, as though the fire knows it has reached the final chapter of the day. You stand slowly, stretching your back, and wander through the hall. Not far, just enough to feel the longhouse in this near-sleep state. People are curled under furs, forms barely visible. A man sleeps sitting up, head resting on his fist. A woman gently snores, her braid trailing across a blanket. A child murmurs something about giants, then sighs, slipping deeper into dreams. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Vikings did not sleep alone, nor in separate rooms. Families slept side by side on long benches, warmth shared, security shared, dreams shared. The night was not a solitary experience. It was a collective act of survival and comfort. You see that clearly now. A mother's arm wrapped around her child, two brothers leaning shoulder to shoulder, a grandparent tucked between family members like a precious artifact. Even the dog, curled right in the warmest spot, becomes part of the great sleeping tapestry. Your first soft joke of the section rises. You suddenly understand that Viking sleep was less private retreat and more group nap with occasional low-level livestock participation. You step toward the darker end of the hall. The animals are dozing too, the cow lying heavy and warm in her straw, the sheep pressed together in a woolen hill of peace, the goat finally, mercifully asleep, legs tucked neatly beneath its body. You pause there, watching them breathe. Their warmth wraps around the air itself. Their presence feels ancient, grounding. The Longhouse isn't just filled with life, it is held by it. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some sagas mention people whispering protective sayings over their animals at night, believing the animals carried part of the household's luck. Looking at them now, it makes perfect sense. They are comfort. They are food. They are warmth. They are continuity. You walk back toward your sleeping spot, slipping between benches with the practiced ease of someone who has lived here longer than a day. You can feel the floor's coolness under your soles, the soft creak of beams adjusting to the temperature, the faint drift of smoke still clinging to the air. Historians still argue whether Vikings stayed up late talking or fell asleep quickly out of exhaustion. Some sources suggest quiet conversations lingered long after the lamps dimmed. Others imply that heavy labour knocked people out almost instantly. Tonight, you see a blend of both. A few murmured voices near the fire, the low hum of someone finishing a song under their breath, and scattered around the hall, soft snores of those already claimed by sleep. You settle onto your bench again, adjusting your cloak, your furs, your still scratchy wool layers. The familiar prickle makes you smile, somehow comforting now, like a friend who always tells you the truth. Your second gentle joke arrives. Congratulations. You have reached the point where itchy wool is no longer an inconvenience, but a personality trait. You lie back, watching the smoke drift lazily toward the rafters. The embers dim. The hall grows darker, but not empty. Never empty. In the quiet, you sense the full weight of the day. The work, the weaving, the stories, the songs, the laughter, the rituals, the drafts, the warmth, the chaos, the harmony. And you understand something simple and powerful. The Longhouse doesn't sleep by extinguishing itself. It sleeps by holding everything, every person, every animal, every breath of smoke, in a slow, steady embrace. The whole structure becomes a cradle, a cocoon, a great wooden lung, rising and falling with shared breath. You close your eyes, listening to that rhythm, feeling it, joining it. Tonight, you're part of the Longhouse's final, deepest quiet, the moment where all the noise of Viking life dissolves into warmth, breath, and the soft whisper of dreams. And now, let everything slow. Imagine yourself lying there on that long wooden bench, wrapped in the thick, reassuring weight of wool and fur, the last glow of the hearth flickering like a distant star. The air is warm in places, cool in others, drifting over you in soft waves as the Longhouse exhales into the late-night hush. You feel the presence of others around you, quiet, steady, peaceful. The soft rhythm of their breathing blends into a gentle lull that settles across the hall like a warm blanket. Somewhere nearby, a child sighs in their sleep. A dog shifts, stretching its paws before settling again. The rafters settle with a low, sleepy creak, as if the house itself is tucking in for the night. The world outside is silent now, the wind resting, the snow turning still, the dark sky leaning close. Inside, the Longhouse becomes its own little universe, enclosed, warm, protective. A place where the night can pass without hurry and the morning can take its time arriving. Your own breathing slows, matching the quiet pulse of the hall. In, gently. Out, even softer. The embers fade a little more, settling into deep red. Their warmth lingers on your skin, comforting and steady. Your body grows heavier, more relaxed, more at ease with every passing moment. The longhouse holds you, shelters you, carries you gently into rest. Nothing to do, nothing to fix, nothing to fear, just warmth, just quiet, just sleep drifting closer and closer, like a soft tide. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your thoughts loosen and wander. Let yourself drift. The longhouse is safe. The night is peaceful, and you can let go now.